Welcome to the Power of Culture. I'm Mayassa bint Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. My nation, Qatar, is on a creative journey supporting the talents of a rising generation, reaching out to other countries through the arts and building an entire cultural infrastructure. In each episode of The Power of Culture, I'm joined by a leading artist or architect, philanthropist or museum professional who's part of Qatar's journey. Listen in as we discuss what the power of culture can do. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the Qatari architect and co-founder of Atlas Bookstore and Studio Imara, Fatma Ibrahim Al Sehlawi. Fatma, tell me a little bit about your background. I know the first time I met you, you were still working for DR, Lusail. I think I bumped into you in Art Basel many years ago. And then somehow you ended up working in our museum project. So tell me a little bit more about what did you study? How did you, decide to join the cultural program whilst you're working at DR, which just, completed Lusail Boulevard and the Lusail City just in time for us to host 1.5 million visitors to Qatar. As you know, Lusail has the main World Cup stadium for the final. So tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I studied architecture for my bachelor's degree, and then soon after, I actually did an internship while I was studying at Lusail. So as soon as I graduated, I joined Lusail City again. It was incredible. As a fresh graduate from architecture school, it was incredible to be given this chance to work on a new city and see it come to life. My first project there was actually to design the manhole covers. And the other day when we were on this inspection tour with you, I walked over a few of them and I did a little dance actually, because it was such a proud moment to see them there all over the city, as simple and as small as this project was. And then I was actually put on the project of the museum. It was 2011. I was assigned to collaborate with the Qatar Museums and the Herzog and the Meuron teams on the master planning of Al-Meha Island, which consisted at the time of the Lusail Museum, the convention center, the hotel, and a public park. We all traveled to Basel for a design workshop at the amazing Herzog and de Meuron's office. I'm saying amazing because I remember how excited I was at the time, a very fresh graduate, and having that chance to enter such an amazing office. I think that was really the start of this very long working relationship with you. And now looking back, it was the beginnings, not the very start, but the beginnings of all the work and all the effort that has gone into this museum project as well. And this was a year after we won the bid, or a few months after we won the bid to host the World Cup. And at Art Basel, there was this huge wall that was a blackboard. And I remember getting up with a chalk and writing Qatar 2022. And I think that's when you saw that and you asked me if I had drawn that, and that was the first time we met. And then of course at the workshops in the Herzog and de Meuron's office. And that's actually also the moment when I really felt that I was interested in working in the cultural sector, whether in a museum or not, but the cultural sector. And I got the opportunity through you and your office to join your office. I remember the first day I joined, my first meeting was with yourself, and the second meeting was with yourself and Rem Koolhaas. And that was another super exciting moment for me, getting to meet him, but also getting to work with him. My brief was to literally shadow him. And that was also the beginning of this very long relationship we have with Rem Koolhaas and OMA now. I think the first project was the Media City.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to the Abdelaziz Al Thani, the person in charge of Qatar Television, about this. And I would love to share with him the work that we did. Maybe they will use it as they plan the future of their buildings. But that's really interesting. So now I know how you joined us. You joined us because of our relationship with DR. As we are preparing the Lusail Museum, which hopefully kicks ground next year as we celebrate Qatar, Switzerland's 50 years of bilateral relations, as Jack Herzog and Pierre de Meuron, as you know, are Swiss architects, and we would love to celebrate them as we celebrate these relationships. You talk about Rem Koolhaas. Rem Koolhaas, I feel, also is like our grandfather. He's been working with us on a lot of projects, Media City. He's now working with us on the Qatar Blueprint. He's really an inspiring mind and thinker who's spent a lot of time working with us here in Qatar on several projects, but also the National Library as well as the Qatar Foundation headquarters. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now with Rem Koolhaas. I think you've moved on from shadowing him to really being a true collaborator with Rem and OMA Studio with the work that we're doing for the Qatar Blueprint.
I really think it's worth mentioning that the working relationship, and it's actually, we've also become very good friends, the QM with OMA, but also Qatar and OMA. It's worth mentioning that they've done more work than anyone else really in the past 10 years, more work in terms of projects that haven't been realized. But it doesn't mean that, those projects are shelved and we never make use of. There's so much research behind every master planning project that OMA has done. And there's this interesting map that I'd love to show you where we've superimposed every single master plan they've done on the Qatar map. And it just shows you how much of Qatar they've actually master planned. And so all of this work, whether it's realized or not, this is research. This is a lot of sort of surveying and understanding not only what a physical master plan or a building could look like in Qatar, but before that, there's a lot of research, a lot of investigation, meetings, oral history, trying to really dissect and understand the context behind every project before actually designing. That's how the work with OMA has been so far. It's before we get into design, there's so much more that we do together. And I think the very first moment where I became a collaborator with OMA was the Making Doha exhibition. It was 4 months before the opening of the National Museum of Qatar when Rem introduced me to Samir Bantal of AMO over coffee at the Sharq Hotel, which, by the way, is Rem's favorite hotel still in Doha. He mentioned that you'd asked him to work on an exhibition about the architecture of Doha to be held at the new museum and to open with the museum. He knew that at the time I had been sort of researching the evolution of the city's architecture, of Doha's architecture, of Qatar as well, and he suggested that we work together on the exhibition. So through Atlas Bookstore, I had to very quickly put a team together of researchers and content creators. And this was a very interesting moment because it was not only architects. I was an architect, there was a filmmaker from DFI, there was a historian from Education City, a graduate of Education City. There was a photographer, Marcus Elblaus, who lived in Qatar, and all he did was sort of flaneur around the city and take pictures. He really understood the city in terms of photography. So there were multiple disciplines that came together for this project. And so it was a collaboration between OMA and not only myself, I have to say, but a team that was based in Qatar that was able to generate all the content for the exhibition, which then I sort of co-curated with Rem and Samir, and it was designed at the OMA offices. We had amazing design workshops there. The exhibition really became a starting point for a national archive for the country's urban development. It had images, we found models in like warehouses and abandoned porta-cabins, films from BFI and drawings from architects who lived here in the 70s. So it was the beginning of this investigation into building an archive for the evolution of the city, but also the evolution of the country in terms of its physical evolution. And I really look, we've been trying to find a permanent space for Making Doha as a public display, and I look forward to this happening after the World Cup with you. And the next collaboration was really at the Countryside exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was supported by yourself as well. And for that, it was also another quick exercise. And OMA asked me to do the research behind what's happening in the countryside of Qatar, especially it being instigated by the blockade on Qatar, looking at food security and how the countryside almost overnight became a very important sort of territory in Qatar, because that's where food security issues were being dealt with, whether it's Baladna as a dairy farm or other farms for vegetables, poultry farms, etc. So from there, now it's the Qatar Blueprint, which is an incredible project to work on.
That's a lot of things that we're working on. And Samir has done a few exhibitions already for us. He did the Virgil Abloh exhibition, and the countryside is opening next year, I believe, to overlap with the Expo, the Agriculture Expo 2023.
Yes, and I think the countryside in the Doha edition of the countryside is going to be very, very interesting. Of course, Rem and Samir can say more about this, but I think when it opened in New York at the Guggenheim, it was February 2020. This was the really last moment before the lockdown, the global lockdown for COVID. And so the countryside had still not gone through the pandemic. And I think in the Doha edition, although it's only sort of 3 years later, the countryside has been through so much. And so it's not simply bringing what was at the Guggenheim to Doha. It's a new body of research, an updated research with very interesting points in the recent history that we've gone through and the countryside has gone through.
And tell me a little bit more about the Atlas Bookstore. What inspired you to found the Atlas Bookstore?
So I founded the Atlas Bookstore with my sister, Reem. We read a lot. This was something that my mom made sure we still did with, the entry of a computer at home and slowly the internet and so much more in school. And so we continued to do so depending on our interests. And there was a moment in time when we had both come back from university studying abroad, realizing that we didn't know enough about the region. We didn't know enough about West Asia and North Africa. And that's when we started reading more about the region and eventually collecting a lot of books. It was too many books at home and my mom asked us to do something with it. That was the moment when we decided, let's make this public. And we found a really nice space, a very small space at the Sheraton Hotel, which of course in itself is an icon here in Qatar, will always be this sort of modernist architectural gem that was designed by American architect William Pereira. And we worked out of there as a project space, not only selling books, but we acted as a library as well, as a reference library. We had a lot of students, PhD students from Switzerland traveling here to just sort of, work out of this library because they were studying the architecture and urbanism of the region, because that was our focus in the library. So that's how it started. And what happened was that eventually our book collection started to travel, whether to temporary exhibitions in Kuwait, Bahrain, the Vitra Design Museum. And we're soon moving to a new space, opening a new space. And in there we have a larger collection, which includes environmental histories and futures of the region. And to start off with that collection, we actually participated in an exhibition at VCUQ here to put out the collection on the flora of Qatar and the different ways in which the flora of Qatar has been documented, whether through books, stamps in the past, the Quranic botanical gardens, as well as sort of oral histories about the flora of Qatar.
And you also started the Studio Imara. What kind of services does that provide? I believe you're doing the houses now in a shagab. I believe there are some hotel.
It's a hotel that's made up of 100 units. So it's not a single building hotel. It's 100 different units, and that's why it was called a village by the client, because you walk through it and you really feel like it's a village. And I have to say that, the very first seed of Studio Imara was actually on the 12th floor in QM Tower 1, because that is where I met my colleague Nasser Al-Amadi, and we worked on projects together in the Capital Projects Department of Qatar Museums. And, in our spare time, we would start to design hypothetical projects responding to different sort of urban situations in the city, right? And then eventually, with the start of the pandemic, a lot of friends approached us because a lot of people in Doha started, because they were spending a lot of time at home, started to rethink the way they wanted to live. And so they wanted to start designing their new homes. And that's how we really started to operate full time as a design studio. We have smaller projects that have been realized, but really the Al Shagab village is the largest one so far. And it was a project that we were commissioned to do 5 months ago. So really 5.5 months before the World Cup. And we had to come up with a solution to build those 100 units in no time, really. And so we found a prefabricated system, all made in Qatar. A lot of the furniture is made here with friends and, former colleagues that were furniture designers. So it's really everything that we're currently working on, whether it's the Qatar Blueprint here at your office or whether it's projects in Studio Imara. It's a beautiful timeline, really, this sort of chronological timeline that started with, I would say, Lusail City and us meeting in Basel.
So the one of the focus the next decade for us is the creative economy. So this is really a great way to showcase how the ecosystem that's being created through the Vision 2030 and the cultural plans that we have between museums and creative hubs and a master plan that we're developing with the stakeholders on the blueprint allows for such initiatives to grow organically and, build the small and medium businesses to grow into an international service company. So this is quite amazing how what 11 years can do in such a short time. I think Qatar has achieved so many great initiatives. How do you feel? We visited Lusail last week and we saw all the great new restaurants and initiatives that have been launched from Al Maha Island with the fun fair, the future Lusail Museum island there as well, in Al Maha. You also have the Place Vendôme. We also have the Clefan Island with the future aqua park that will open in 2023. How does that make you feel as somebody who was part of the planning and part of the team that started Lusail City?
It was an incredible feeling walking through the city and sort of driving through the city. It was a very short time ago that we were, as I said, designing the manholes, or also what I also worked on was the plant palette for all the public spaces in the city. And at the time, it was very strange because there was no context. I would look out the window from the office and it was just sand. It was just the desert and then the coastline. There was no context to work with. So it was very difficult to imagine those public spaces. And I was actually told by a collaborator of William Pereira that's actually how he felt designing the Sheraton, that he looked around and there was absolutely nothing. But that these things were very possible in Qatar and they still are. That from, a very, very sort of blank canvas, something so magnificent can be built, and something that has proven to be very humane. We saw together how mixed Lusail City is. There's an offering for everyone. So it was really a great moment to walk through the city after a few days of taking a break to sort of look back at everything that has happened over the past few months, over the past year, over the past decade as well. And it's more about recalibrating. It's not about restarting, definitely not. This is a vision that has been set in stone a long time ago, and we're working on this vision and on this foundation. We're continuing that, as we always say in Qatar Museums. But there needs to be a moment where we sort of reflect, document, analyze and survey and recalibrate for the way forward. And I think this is really what our mandate will be in the Qatar Blueprint. And we're not only doing this for museums or the cultural sector. We're actually looking at the country as a whole, the map of Qatar, and not specific areas that are designated to Qatar Museum. So it's going to be a very interesting moment where everyone will have time again to think and to brainstorm and discuss before we sort of start running and delivering and executing. And it's very important that we do this with the different entities in the country, from the public sector, private sector, who have now become very interested in working with us and have started to understand that what we want to do is beyond just looking within the walls of our museums. We are capable, we have done so much more outside of those walls, and we are capable of doing so much more for the country.
And this, segues nicely into my next question for you. We've already executed some of the blueprint with the zonings and linking to heritage villages, with the recent opening of the Ain Mohammed village near Zubara and the reopening of the Zubara Visitor Center, as well as the installation of public art in various places, like the recently installed Oliver license piece, as well as Simon Fattal and Ernesto Neto. Say a bit of why the planning document was important for us to achieve such synergies between heritage and contemporary art, between private and public sector. And the whole northern area today is revived through this intervention.
I really think that the project of the Northern Heritage Sites is the very beginning, and it's an excellent example to give to everyone, to show them how areas that, we used to consider as just desert, blank desert, can become very attractive areas. And not all deserts, Qatar is not flat. When I say flat, I don't mean mountains. I mean that the desert offers so many different typologies of deserts, and each area, each zone is very different from the other. And we really need to, number one, sort of understand that, and number two, celebrate that. And that was really an outcome of this very first and initial survey of the Qatar Blueprint. The Qatar Blueprint was really a request from His Highness the Emir, if you remember, in a meeting, asking us to sort of propose an alternative way of activating the country, activating the different assets of the country. And that's how the survey started. And one of the first guidelines that we put for ourselves, because the brief did not come with guidelines, the first guideline we put for ourselves is that let's not focus on Qatar again as being flat. It is not only a single city country. It's not only Doha, as many know, but we really need to sort of unwrap the understanding that there are so many more other towns, other areas that are very interesting. And going back to the National Master Plan of Qatar that has designated 8 different municipalities, maybe this is how we should align with the planning document, the main official planning document of the country. And so this is what we did. We decided to go with that. Although, yes, these are lines that are drawn in the desert as a planning tool. However, we found that, there was a lot of research done before those lines were drawn to designate the municipalities. Each municipality has a very distinct character, a distinct identity, distinct offerings that have not been tapped into yet. And so this is really what we wanted to understand. And, we did those Thursday tours with you. That the idea sounded very simple, right? It's just a tour in a different region every week. But the discoveries that we came out with were incredible, whether it's about the people in each zone or each municipality, whether it's about the natural settings there, the industrial settings, the north. We became very interested in the north because we saw the amount of farmlands there and the productivity in the north. But that's also where the main gas plant, LNG plant is. So another type of productivity. But then there's a lot of history there. The trail of heritage sites and the coastal trail of heritage villages that said something about how people lived and how people dealt with food security as well, how they were connected to wells and how the coastal areas were connected to inland farms. There's multiple layers of history, but also multiple layers of existing assets in each municipality that we found was important to survey, document. And hopefully this is where we will kickstart again next month and sort of build up on the survey that we started. I think this is a very important step in not creating a new, but in sort of promoting the way we brand our nation and promote the way we think of sort of activations in different municipalities to better the quality of life for the residents in Qatar. Whether they're residents in Doha that might be attracted to move to other towns and other areas of Qatar, or whether it's creating more offerings for the tourists. And we're not only looking at, tourists from far away and international tourists, but regional tourists that they can come here and enjoy offerings that are very close to their cultures and their countries, but also local tourism here, domestic tourism, which is very active. There is a huge appetite for it. And I think that the Qatar Blueprint can really bring out outcomes for scenarios that can feed into all of these different sort of goals.
Yeah, we started with our beach cleanups during COVID and the mapping of the different zones and how to connect. the different experiences. And I think these organic growth enables for such amazing experiences. Qatar today has so much to offer all year round to all families, whether they're residents of Qatar, whether they're Qatari families, whether they're visitors to Qatar as tourists. So it's really great to see how much has come together through these partnerships. We just also launched a new initiative, the Dahl al Misfar, with the Ministry of Environment. Again, one can experience that at the National Museum playgrounds. We're also opening the Total Energy Playground in partnership with Total for children to learn about the oil and gas industry. So it's everything is coming together nicely. So I believe 2023 allows for new planning and review of our existing initiatives and to develop our economy further in terms of its diversification. So tell me, Fatma, in terms of the Lusail Museum, where your journey began with us and our launch, or we're breaking ground next year, how, again, we have 4 exhibitions on Lusail Museum to share with the visitors. But interestingly, we're connecting the museum to the founder of Qatar, Sheikh Jassim bin Mohammed, who we celebrate him every December 18th on our National Day. Speak a little bit about the guest experiences that we're offering for heritage sites, so that they could learn about Lusail, the connection of the Lusail Museum to the founders' homes in the future city of Lusail.
It's a cultural experience to really understand the history of not only Qatar, but the region, the achievements of Qatar, and the future plans that we have in Qatar as well. And that's the incredible thing, that although the Lusail Museum as a building does not exist yet, construction is starting very soon. Because this museum has been a project for over a decade now, there is a lot of content already, and there is a lot of thought that went into making this museum. And this in itself is a case study. How is a museum made and crafted here in the region, specifically in Qatar? Not made and crafted in terms of a building, but yes, a building, but also the content, the narrative, which has really evolved since this museum idea started. And so it's a rich and deep experience that every visitor will have. There's a lot of content to take back, whether, intentionally walking into an exhibition or not, whether it's, traveling to a museum or just seeing public art as we have all around the city. There is so much to intake. And I think every person will leave with so much more than just a football match that they watched and a few hours spent in a fan festival. That's also important for Lusail City. As you mentioned in the very beginning, that is where the main stadium of the World Cup is. And Lusail City is a very interesting city for the World Cup. One of the first criticisms that came out from the West when we first won the bid is that the city they're talking about, which will host the main stadium, doesn't even exist. But from the name, we know that this area has existed. Lusail village, before the concept of the city, just over 10 years ago, was the headquarters of the founder of the country. That's where the Diwan was. That's where, the taxation building was for the incoming fleets of dhows selling pearls, fishermen, etc. It was a very busy hub. And that is really where Lusail started in the late 1800s. So all of that is now shown in the Lusail Museum exhibition. One can go in and can understand that, the connection of this geographical area and name to the founder of the country and to the history of the country. And also how, guests and visitors will be able to see and spend a lot of time in Lusail, but they will know that there is more coming and they will come back, because it's such an important thing to know that there is this huge, amazing museum coming to this area. Culture, heritage, and art are all fundamental pillars of every livable and appealing city. And we already have a lot of public art, as we saw just a few days ago in Lusail, delivered by Qatar Museums and other partners, which have elevated the city's identity. But I think the addition of the museum and the activation of the Lusail Heritage Village, hopefully as well, will only strengthen that identity of this new city as well. It will improve the quality of life for the area's inhabitants. They will have a museum, a cultural center, an educational center there. It just brings in intellectual, cultural, global content to this city. And it's important that this is being exhibited, before it opens in a few years' time. And I think this is just an example of one exhibition and one project. Of course, we're doing the same for the Art Mill 2030 Museum, the Auto Museum, the Dedu Children's Museum. And it's important that we've found this way, which I think is very innovative and new in the region or even globally, to share the narrative and share the projects with the people of the country and with the guests prior to them being realized and executed. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's a great summary and a way to end our conversation. As we celebrate the years of culture Mayassa, we're very delighted to showcase our heritage and culture amongst these exhibitions and our future museums. So thank you, Fatma, for your insight and time. And I look forward to what the future will bring to the Blueprint. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you, Sheikha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.